My belief is that GPT-3 or something like it is already being rolled out onto the population. And now we're getting to a point where counterfeit journalism is going to be such a big threat. I believe that they already turned it on with this like COVID thing. And as we roll into the latter half of 2021 and into the early 2022, we're going to have a crisis in journalism where we don't really know what's going to be real and what's going to be not real, what's going to be written by a computer.
Welcome to the Health Ranger Report on Brighteon.tv. I'm Mike Adams, the founder of Brighteon. Today we have truly one of the most important guests of our time. His name is Zach Vorhies, and he joins us to talk about censorship and machine learning fairness and how Google is censoring health information, medical information, but not just Google, the other tech platforms as well. He's the author of a new book called Google Leaks, and you can find that book at googleleaksbook.com. Learn more information about that, see other videos. And by the way, Zach is a guest with some of our other hosts here on Brighteon.tv as well. And he has a tremendous amount of information and a very important message for humanity that we all need to pay attention to. So feel free to repost this interview anywhere you can. It will be censored because we're talking about censorship. But stay with me here. We'll be right back after this short break on Brighteon.tv with Zach Vorhies. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back. I'm Mike Adams of Brighteon.tv. And as I promised, today our special guest is none other than Zach Vorhies. He's the author of Google Leaks, which is available at googleleaksbook.com. Zach, it's always an honor and pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining me today. We've got a lot to cover.
Thanks, Mike. It's good to be here.
Well, you are the man who knows the plan. You were inside the beast of Google. You became a Google whistleblower, and now you're working on solutions against censorship. Tell us about some of really what's on your mind, what's in the book, and perhaps a few hints of what you've got coming next.
Yeah. So in my book, Google Leaks, we give the backstory about how I exfiltrated 950 pages of Google's internal documents to the general public through Project Veritas. I talk about how I went from basically a classical liberal to realizing that, oh my God, there's this coup that's happening on humanity, and that Google seems to be in this colluder circle, this network of people that are, basically going from a really great libertarian organization to one that's building the Ministry of Truth, to use 1984 language. This was information that they hid from the public. They gaslighted you. They told their investors that they were going to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible. But as soon as the wrong president was democratically elected, they turned a full 180 and they said, we have to start censoring the fake news. And then they created this algorithm, or rather ingested it from Stanford, called, and get this, machine learning fairness, which they were secretly unleashing onto Google Search, Google News, and YouTube in order to manipulate the information landscape, take control of elections, and be able to move America to their corporate values, which is the same values that the MSM shares. And really, this is a piece of a larger plot to get Americans, influence them in their homes with the things that they read, with total information, like narrative over and over and over and over and over again. And when I found this out, I realized that I couldn't live with myself, Mike. I couldn't live with myself walking into work every single day, knowing that while I was feeding from the trough of this mega corporation, that this same mega corporation was actively subverting America and pushing their version of reality, which is subjective and not true and not based on truth, to the American public. And
you mentioned their values. They're also pushing their values. Well, it's clear to everybody those aren't American values. Those aren't Christian values. What are their values, or really what's their end game in all of this?
The end game, and I didn't really want to believe this, but it took me a long time to come to it, is essentially the values of it's not even the values I would say of the New World Order. It's Yuri Bezmenov's explanation of active measures and ideological subversion. And what Google is pushing is they're pushing ideas that will destabilize the United States and make it fall without the enemy firing a shot. And the question is, who's the enemy and why are they destabilizing America? And I really don't know the answer to that question. And I know that that's one of their greatest secrets. And this group of globalists, for lack of a better term, is using the transgender movement, racism as wedges in order to divide America, keep them fighting against each other. And the more that we fight and the more that we spend, the more that we destabilize our country, and then it just falls. And this is not the only country that this has been done to. This has been done through countries throughout history. Now, the difference is that we have a highly technological component, which is Google and Facebook and these other big tech cartels.
Well, I'm going to press you on this just a little bit, Zach, because I think it's a pretty short list of who they might be answering to, who might be behind this. And again, depending on who you ask, the full spectrum, maybe it's communist China, maybe it's extraterrestrials, maybe it's demons from another dimension. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's just insane, crazy globalists who hate humanity. It's a pretty short list, actually. What could possibly be behind a tech company wanting to destroy America quite overtly?
I mean, it's open. It's an open secret, and you just go to their investor page and you see who the biggest stockholders is, and it's Vanguard, and it's Blackwater, and then you go and you look at who owns most of Blackwater, and I saw this rumor. I can't confirm it's true, but I believe that Vanguard owns the most of Blackwater, and then you go, well, who owns Vanguard? And by the way, I was part of Vanguard as I put my money in there. All the Google employees did, and look at the stockholders of Vanguard, and it's my belief that that's secret. And so this huge mega investment corporation, which is gobbling up all the assets of our corporations and our houses, we don't know who owns them. And that's by design.
Yeah, and you're right. They are buying up real estate. So, a lot of my other guests have talked about a coming financial collapse or a real estate collapse. That's going to allow Vanguard to buy up really some significant percentage of housing in America, turning the United States and perhaps other countries into kind of a, like a slave farming operation where everybody pays rent to this unknown cloud investor group that controls everything, including Google.
Yeah, I think that's what's on the plate for us. And it may be like a slave future, but with UBI. So it doesn't really feel like slavery, but you won't be able to challenge the system. You'll be given some allotment. There'll be complete equity everywhere. Everyone will be treated the same by this totalitarian system where, and the reason why you'll be treated the same is because they're going to have artificial intelligence. They're going to have robot labor. There's really nothing that humans are needed anymore for this imperialism. If they want to explore space, they just have their technocrats do the robot army, and then boom, you've got a spaceship going, and mining asteroids. And so the question now is what do you do with all these people that can't contribute to society because the artificial intelligence is just so much better than them? And the answer that I hope is that we have a discussion about it. Like, this is the total sum of humanity's knowledge that these technocrats are appropriating for their AI. We should have, as the generators of that data, a say in how this AI is going to be used in the future of humanity. And that's my message. I doubt that it's going to be listened to by anyone of importance, like the real importance. I think that essentially what we're heading for right now is World War III, because, whenever the elites get a new weapon, they immediately go to war. And right now we've got, massive AI and robot labor that's coming online, and drones and, that are smart and communicate with satellites. I think the world's going to have to figure it out by going and creating a lot of war. And if you're an oligarch, think about it. You could set up two wars where you make all these robots because, we're in a war, we have to make all these robots. And then the war gets ended, and then the robots get turned onto the population. And now it's just by the way, you've got these 5 robot, servants, but they spy on you, and you have to watch what you say because your phone spies on you, your Bluetooth headset spies on you, your robot servants spy on you. And that's like the good outcome. That's the optimistic outcome of where we could be heading. The pessimistic outcome is that, the Georgia Guidestones are mythopoetic prophecies that the elites intend to fulfill, and that we're in the beginning stages of a 95% coal rate, because that's how you're going to get the population from 8 billion down to the 500 billion that is written into stone as one of the prophecies. So I've been trying for the last 6 months to eliminate the possibility in my mind that this is a coaling operation. And so far, I really can't. Like the dumping of the crash of the Moderna semi-truck onto the highway, which got handled by the Department of Defense. What does that tell you? Like this stuff is so
the airspace.
Yeah. It's so important that this doesn't fall into the wrong hands. This vaccine that they're injecting into each and every one of us that volunteers for it. It's so the ingredients is so secret that they have to have the Department of Defense come and clean it up.
Well, yeah, let me ask you, let's talk about exotic technology, perhaps nanotech and so on, but let me ask you about key areas. For Google to roll out this robotic future to fully replace human beings, there are some areas of tech that at least publicly are not quite there yet. But my question to you, Zach, is whether these areas have a lot more development in your view than what has been made public. And those would be, AI cognition, quantum computing, perhaps, but also high density energy storage systems for robots to be able to function with their own onboard battery systems. And then, of course, robotic vision recognition, ambulatory control systems, and artificial muscles. Now, we've seen a lot of developments in those areas, but they're pre-programmed dancing robots. That's very different from an adaptive response to a live environment. So where do you think these technologies really are behind the scenes that they haven't yet made public?
I mean, I think that right now, so there's this Kurzweilian singularity. And the problem with that book is that he makes the prediction that the singularity is going to happen in 2033. And when I was just doing like and his basis on that singularity is the fact that the intelligence is going to be in one CPU die. When I was at Google, I looked at the Borg cluster, which is the thing that they have that runs all their computation. That thing has enough CPU power to run a super intelligence today. We just didn't have the software for it. And see, the great leap into this new AI is actually not the hardware. It's actually the software techniques that they're using in order to do supervised training on these like neural nets. And that's essentially what you had a lot of questions there, by the way. So I'm going to try to remember each and every one of them. But that's how the artificial intelligence is created, is with these neural nets in the software. And so as the software continues to get better, we're going to have better and better AI. And one of the most amazing AIs that came out was from Elon Musk's company, OpenAI. And it was called GPT-3, which was the third series in the GPT series. GPT-1, GPT-2 was like, oh my God, it's like really good. And then GPT-3 was like, this thing is going to win a Turing Award for being able to fool people into thinking that's a person. And what it's done is it's basically read all of Wikipedia and the entire internet and all these books. And you can just type in any part of a sentence and it will autocomplete the sentence with what it thinks is the best text to put it in there. And this thing can write code. And like literally you can type in a function signature for like a Python expression and it will fill in the missing code based upon huge repositories of data. As soon as this came out by the OpenAI company, Microsoft snatched it up within 30 days of the public beta. They shut down the public beta for everyone else. Microsoft now has an exclusive license to this GPT-3 thing. This GPT-3 is so realistic that it's going to fool anyone. They'll actually think that whatever it writes is written by a human. And these are the sort of technologies that are behind these barriers, right? Because now Microsoft has GPT-3 and they can start unleashing it onto the public, have it write automatic articles and da-da-da-da. And I believe that there was a story that happened about 6 months ago. You may remember you type in any 3-digit number and it will say like this county has like so many such and such cases. And people are like, how is it possible that we've written 10,000 articles so that you can type in any 3 or 4 a digit number and come up with that number of cases in a particular region of the earth. And it was like a random every single time of which region it was. My belief is that GPT-3 or something like it is already being rolled out onto the population. And now we're getting to a point where counterfeit journalism is going to be such a big threat. I believe that they already turned it on with this like COVID thing. And as we roll into the latter half of 2021 and into the early 2022, we're going to have a crisis in journalism where we don't really know what's going to be real and what's going to be not real, what's going to be written by a computer. And right now, I think that a lot of people are coming to this conclusion. And that's the reason why spoken word over video is so popular, because right now they're not really deep faking, like a Mike Adams, yet anyways, that may change in the future, but people really want to know what authentic information is happening. And so right now we're having a deeper crisis in written journalism. I think that people are tuning that out, and that's going to be like a trend that's going to continue on for these next few years.
So a couple of thoughts from that. That's fascinating what you just said, but even the journalists who are going along with all of this and, pushing the vaccines and pushing the propaganda and defending Google and so on, they probably don't realize they are going to be exterminated as part of this plan, because they're going to be easily replaced. I mean, they're reading scripts right now.
Yeah.
But soon, the scripts could just be written by this AI system. Maybe they are already, but then soon they won't even need the performance of the so-called journalists. They're not journalists, they're actors, right? They're just performing.
Prostitutes, right? Yeah.
Right.
Acting in a role.
Right. But the second part of this has to do with COVID in particular, because the censorship that began really getting aggressive in 2015 and 2016 was mostly politically based. But since the COVID pandemic was initiated, the censorship has become really focused on censoring ivermectin or censoring stories of vaccine injury. YouTube recently censored a channel that was offering prayer as a treatment for COVID in lieu of vaccines. So you cannot worship God. You can only worship Fauci, I guess. That's the current system.
Yeah, and it's getting worse, right? Someone was critical of Biden because her son died, and she was like at the event that Biden was at, and she had a really nasty post for him on Facebook, and Facebook disabled her account, and so did Instagram.
Right.
And
so the censor. There's no end to this, it seems, from people observing this. Even like Glenn Greenwald observing this, or a lot of writers on Substack right now observing this. Former mainstream liberals, like you used to be as well, are just totally freaking out and saying, this is insane. Where does this end? Does it end?
Every single time I've put a line in the sand for Google and say, well, they can't possibly cross this line, and they run right past it every single time. And so the question that I have is, what is the maximum line that I could draw where even Google would say, oh, that's too dystopian, that's too evil, we won't be crossing that line? And honestly, I've stopped giving up, and I've started giving up, and I don't know how far they're going to push this. I suspect that they may basically create online propaganda ghettos where people go and they get convinced with a whole bunch of people, because they're like, oh, well, if there's this many people saying something, it can't all be false, can it? Right? Like the same thing with the COVID thing. Like everyone was saying how full the hospitals were in 2020. And then, my friend like Jason Goodman would go to a hospital and it'd be empty. And and people are blown away because they're like, how can there be this echo chamber like on Reddit? And it is contradicted by just walking up to the locations that are being talked about, taking a camera and recording it and showing everyone else. Like
as you explained here, it seems like any text-based communication today, whether it's Reddit or Facebook or Twitter, might really just be AI systems, just Borg systems run by big tech at this point. But my question to you on this is then, you already mentioned that voice communications, is harder to fake. Video, like what we're doing, is harder for them to fake. But what are really the best strategies that consumers of information can use to make sure that they're hearing from humans? Because even You know, you mentioned they haven't deep faked me yet, but I've given them thousands of hours of video that they can certainly ingest. They can absolutely deep fake me at some point. So how do people know the difference?
Well, you can't fool all the people. Right now it looks like if there was a deep fake coming out there, people would, look at it. I guess what there really needs to be is there needs to be an intermediation engine that sits there and gets in there and fact checks, the content creators and says, we believe that this is real, and put the stamp of approval on it. And that's something that I've actually been working on, and not to get brought into that topic, but there is a solution. And I believe that it's coming.
Well, but how about just a human check? Like this person's a human being. I mean, people have different facts, different views. I interviewed an analyst in exopolitics talking about extraterrestrial civilizations. You can't really fact check that stuff, but he's a real human being who holds those views. So that's worth listening to, even if you don't agree with it. How do we know that people are just human, really, I guess is the question.
Yeah. So this is a really interesting question, because you basically need some sort of signature on a person so that when they use the internet, they are able to say, hey, this is my digital signature, and this proves that it was written by a person. And if that bit of information doesn't have a signature on it, then it can't go out into the internet and propagate, right? Like, for example, you could imagine a Reddit clone where you have to register your biometric ID to prove that you're a human. And if they don't have that, then they're going to just be overrun with bots, which is the big problem with Reddit right now, is that it's overrun with intelligence operatives and probably AI that downvotes anything that goes against the narrative. And
right.
People, it's funny because these globalists, they put out these things like, oh, digital vaccine passport, and people are like, oh, it's really bad. But then like in the middle of that is like something that's actually really useful, which is like, we need an ID that identifies us to prevent this AI problem, where this AI takes over all the internet communications and starts deepfaking videos, and then locks us into an incompatible ideological chamber that's different than the ideological echo chamber that this AI creates for other people. Like, we need to prevent that from happening. And really the only way that we can prevent that is by having some sort of biometric ID that can't be counterfeited by other computer systems. And if we can go ahead.
Well, it's fascinating that you're saying this, because I've always supported the idea of a decentralized identification confirmation that could be used by choice by people like myself that want to say, yes, you're watching me, or by you, Zach, to know that it's really from you. But what none of us want is some kind of globalist run ID requirement system that's controlled, and then there's no anonymity and no whistleblowers. I mean, you're a whistleblower. And you relied on anonymity during parts of that whistleblowing in order to get your message out as well. So how do we navigate all that?
Right.
Well, the thing is, and a half. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. The thing is that even when it came out anonymously, it came out under the umbrella of Project Veritas. So in a sense, I was using the authority of Project Veritas, who was signing for me, so that when I came out as anonymous, they're like, this is a Project Veritas anonymous person, not just some random person on the internet. And I think that authority signing, which currently exists in computers, has a great use case in the real world.
Okay. All right. Thanks for summarizing that quickly. Now, for those of you watching on Brighteon.tv, this interview continues. There's a longer form of this that's being released on my channel on Brighteon.com, and that's the HR Report channel there. But for those of you on Brighteon.tv, we're going to wrap this up in less than a minute. Zach, you want to just give us your book and the URL before we close this out?
Yeah, check out my book on Amazon.com. It's super hot. You can also read the preview at GoogleLeaksBook.com. We've got great reviews coming in. Kirkus Reviews, which is a liberal site, to our surprise, loves the book. So this book isn't just for conservatives. It's also for liberals and progressives and anyone else who doubts that, how evil Google is. This is the hard facts. This has got pictures in it. Even the liberals who read this book, they come away and they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that this was happening. So check out the first few chapters at GoogleLeaksBook.com right now.
All right, it's a big wake-up call for everybody. And stay with me, Zach. We'll continue on the other side of this. Thank you for watching Brighteon.tv. All right, The clock is reset. Oh, thank you for continuing with me, Zach. So, now, where else do you want to go with this? I know that Google modified its algorithm to specifically censor Trump. Do you want to talk about the dangers of that approach?
So I want to talk about how Google altered their algorithms in order to target Trump, and specifically during the Comey crisis, where he ended up firing Comey, but there was like that back and forth. Look at this right here. This is one of about 8 slides where they were looking at Donald Trump and his fight with Comey. And because of this, they looked at this and they said, well, there's 18,000 stories that were posted on Trump Comey over the period of about 7 days. And so they looked at all the data that was from these stories and they figured out how to join them together into big mega stories. And then when a new story would arrive on the scene, it would be merged with this larger story and then would inherit all of the boosts that mega story would have. And so this thing called real-time events and event monitoring would find these trends, create a mega story. And then when bad news would come out on Trump, they would boost that all the way to the very tippy top of Google search, Google News, and YouTube. And so when you go on Google search right now and you type on in anything, you're going to realize that it's going to sort of hijack your search and talk about something that is aligned with the deep state talking points. So for example, go to Google, type in ivermectin. For the first 2 pages, you're going to get links that say that ivermectin is bad and you shouldn't be taking dog dewormer. And it's got all these side effects like diarrhea. Yeah, may also save your life too, but they don't want to mention that because that hasn't been proven yet by a $2 billion study that someone wants to bankroll for nothing because it's a generic medication in order to test whether this works or not. So people want to know how that works. How does Google re-rank everything? Well, they re-rank everything by several factors. One of them is based on what's called an EAT score. EAT stands for expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. And this EAT score is factored into the PageRank score, which gives your site relevance. And if you have a high PageRank score, you get ranked up. If you have a low PageRank score, you get ranked down. Guys, Ted Cruz subpoenaed Google for his PageRank score, and Google refused. They are not giving your PageRank score to anyone. And all we know from their public guidelines on how they create this PageRank score, well, they basically rank you on what the MSM has to say and what Wikipedia has to say. Right. So if all of a sudden you see that some hit pieces appearing in Wikipedia and then they get laundered through in the MSM and then get laundered into Wikipedia, you know that you're within a few months of Google completely downranking and destroying your organic search traffic because all of a sudden, because the MSM said something bad about you, you're now a D-ranked and a second-class citizen, which means that we're going to put you on the 7th page or something, and you're not going to have the rankings that you used to did. And if you're on the 7th page, you might as well not be on the Google index, if you ask me.
Well, and plus, page 1 is all going to be hit pieces against you, which are lies. I remember when we were banned from Facebook, the reason they gave was spam. We never spammed anybody. We had 2.5 million organic, legitimate human followers. Absolutely no spam, but they just make things up. Google did that to us at one time too. They said, there was malicious code on one of your pages. No, there wasn't. They made it up. But then they established that as fact. But my question to you, Zach, is there any legitimate or really upcoming technology, decentralized, peer-to-peer, blockchain based, any kind of technology that can render a lot of Google obsolete? Because I know a lot of really smart people working on new social media sites, working on new internets, basically, even new, TCP/IP protocols like a second parallel internet, things like that. Can we make Google obsolete?
Yes, and I'm working on a YouTube replacement that's sort of a cross-platform aggregation system. And it's actually the last chapter of my book. I talk about the thesis of the system, which I can't announce yet today, but I will announce very soon. And what it does is it goes out there and it scans for you around 300 influencers, grabs their video content, and then combines it into one single page. They can be on YouTube or Brighteon or BitChute or Odyssey or Rumble. And this is actually already done. We're in final beta testing stages. And Mike, I'd like to come back on the show and announce it with you, because I think that your listeners, this is going to solve a very big problem for them. They don't want to be censored any longer.
Oh yeah, that's super exciting. Absolutely would love to have you back on to announce that. And I also want to say, I guess I'll just say this publicly, that as much as we are committed to free speech, here at Brighteon, we take no money from investors. We're not ever going to go IPO. I'm not going to mention names, but there are other platforms that I have concerns about, and even Andrew Torba has concerns about, because they're investor funded. Eventually they're going to have board of directors. They're going to answer to shareholders. Guess what? Of course they're going to start censoring unpopular views about ivermectin or anything that goes against big pharma. So, more censorship is coming, even from probably some unexpected quarters here.
Yeah, there is, right? And, we don't want to be suckered into these, free platforms where we embrace them and then they extort us, right?
Right.
Like this is a common pattern that we see, and which is the reason why that we need to support platforms that don't have their strings coming from the cabal, for lack of a better term, right?
Exactly.
And that's one of the reasons why I think this website that I'm going to launch, this anti-censorship website, will be successful, is because, look, I made it and it's better than most things out there. And I got super obsessed and I just built it, made it look so good. And when it launches, people are not going to have any questions because I've made the whole thing. And
That's awesome.
Whether you trust me or not, right? It depends on whether you're going to want to use this service. And so, we don't want to have what happened to Drudge Report happen to other websites, right? Like, well, it gets popular and then the money comes in and they just capture it and then turn it for their narrative purposes.
Well, I think what they said to Drudge, and this is just my speculation, but I think they said to him, look, we can either give you, $400 million and you walk away, turn it over to us, or we will destroy you. Which one do you want? Mm-hmm. And I think he saw what was coming. I mean, he warned Alex Jones about it publicly a few years back. And I think my guess is he took the money and, turned it over. But I would rather stand and fight, even if it's to the very end. I would just stand and fight. It's like, you want to take us down? Go for it, but we're going to resist the entire way, period.
Mike, there's a big question that I get asked, which is, how do we fight these people? And, my answer to this is that you don't want to be the guy like in judo who goes to smash your enemy in the face and then, gets caught by the hand. You can't strike like that. You have to strike with the power of your spirit and moral superiority. And if you don't have that, then you need to develop it, because that's the only way that we can fight these people. They out-resource us. They have a web of lies. They have a machine that's built, and we have the truth. And we have the truth that, there is a power that is greater than us, that we're humbled and grateful to be in the presence, and to experience this life in all of its glory and all of its pain. And, when we fight against this cartel that's, doing what they're doing, we have to make sure that when we fight, we have, we're spiritually aligned, and that we mean what we say. And that's pretty much what we have to do, is that we can't, if we go head to head, we're going to lose every time. And they're just going to catch us and turn us into part of their psyop that strikes back and gives them more power. And so, I just want to...
They're always adapting their language of how they attack us. Remember, in 2016, it was hate speech. So if you were pro-Trump, you were guilty of hate speech. Well, now, guess what? The word is misinformation when it comes to COVID or vaccines or ivermectin. Oh, it's misinformation. But if you think about it, the very definition of misinformation relies on some arbitrarily decided authoritative source who is the all-knowing source of their truth. If you say ivermectin's good, they say, well, the CDC says it's not. Therefore, it's misinformation. Well, what if the CDC is lying?
Yeah.
Right? Which they are.
Right. It's like, and people would say, what, Zach, do you think that you're smarter than, the CDC? I'm like, no, I don't think I'm smarter than the CDC. I think the CDC is lying.
Yeah, you're more moral than the CDC.
Right. And and what they're doing is that they're taking these little half truths, like the FDA hasn't approved ivermectin for COVID-19 because no one's going to pay $2 billion to do that test for a generic drug. So we can't say it in the affirmative. And then it turns out that if you give too much of the drug, because every drug is toxic, even water up to a certain point, well, they're like, oh, if you take too much, it could have like negative health repercussions. And so therefore, we have to like take it off for your safety. And it was like the same sort of logic. Remember back in March of 2020 when Fauci was like, oh, we got to take the masks off the market because people are being price gouged. We need to save them from being price gouged from these people that are trying to charge too much for masks. So the solution is going to be removing all the masks in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, I remember
Unbelievable. Unbelievable, Mike.
Yeah, well, and plus, ivermectin has been approved by the FDA for other uses.
Yes.
20 plus years ago, it was approved by the FDA. So it would just be an off-label prescription, which is incredibly common. Meanwhile, the real experimental intervention is the mRNA vaccine, which the FDA still has not approved. They've only approved the Comirnaty, which is available in Europe, but not available in the US. So the vaccines are still experimental here. I know that's not your area of focus, but what do you think about all of the censorship and deliberate disinformation surrounding vaccines and COVID?
I mean, when there's an intelligence operation, you can tell because of the enormous amount of disinfo that comes out and all of the little psyops that they do. And nothing can exemplify that better than this whole COVID, pandemic, right? Like, oh, don't use masks. And, and even the right was like, hey, masks don't work, which, that's kind of true. They don't work, but they kind of work a little bit. And so it's like, we just got to this thing where everyone's just fighting. And now they're dehumanizing the anti-vaxxers and saying, or health freedom advocates. And they're now going after them. And it's a big psychological operation. I think that this is a pandemic. I think that this was something that they had up their sleeves. I don't think it's the China virus. I think it's the China deep state virus. I think that the party at Davos and China are working together in order to bring this out so that they can lock us down. And, there's already places around the world that are locking down. Australia, it's gone. It's fallen. I just got a text message from my friend from a conversation he had with someone living in Vietnam. And in the last 2 months, they've just been on lockdown. So Canada's going to fall on lockdown here pretty soon. And we need to realize that, hey, we're in the middle of a psyop right now. And it's pretty much like, I think it's the birth of the fourth industrial revolution. And so things are destabilizing right now. And I think that we're kind of headed towards World War III, maybe. So, my best recommendation is that we just sort of hold on tight and see where this takes us. And in my opinion, be very, very skeptical about taking that vaccine. The CDC released an interview in which they casually mentioned that those who got the vaccine earlier are at really high risk for getting severe disease. And it just sort of got mentioned casually, in a public call, and the MSM just ignored it. So, be very careful out there. You don't want to be part of these guinea pigs. And for those that say, oh, well, the deep state's not going to target the people that just go along with everything. Have you been paying attention for the last 4 decades? They kind of do. So don't be one of their cannon fodder. Just pay attention to your family, yourself, your community, because those are the things that impact you and are important on a day-to-day basis.
But the mainstream people really aren't paying attention. They lack information. And they lack the willingness to even embrace information that contradicts the behavior they already took, which is taking the vaccine. So at that point, then they filter everything to reinforce the action they already took. This is a very well-known psychological phenomenon. But my final question to you, because we're almost out of time here today, but are you surprised at how many people, including very high IQ people, have gone along with the PSYOP and have essentially become highly irrational in their defense of this system that I would describe, many of my guests describe as really an extermination ploy to mass murder humanity. Are you shocked at how many are going along with this?
Yeah, I keep on thinking to myself that every single time something gets announced, that this will be the thing that finally breaks the leftists from their hypnotism. But what I've realized is that even though this information is reaching people like myself, at this point, the censorship firewalls are so high that it's just not getting to our leftist friends. And so like when a study comes out on Israel, talking about how the vaccines are not effective at preventing, the Delta spread, your leftist friends are never going to see that. They'll have no idea that what you're talking about. They're going to claim that you're just making stuff up, because if this was really an important topic, the mainstream media would have had a discussion about it. And they haven't woken up to the fact that the entire thing is a controlled ecosystem, echo chamber. And I've been completely surprised at how much people have been taken in by this pandemic. But I do live in San Francisco, so my view is not, typical. And but when I have done polls on my followers, I do find out that a lot of their friends are leftists. So the propaganda is really strong. And I don't know how, if people are waking up. I honestly don't know if people are waking up or people are, going further asleep. I know that we're definitely polarizing more. Mike, what do you think about it? Are people waking up, or are they getting sucked into the hypnotism?
Well, I think they're getting sucked in, and when they take the vaccine, it's a slow-acting lobotomy, and there is something called autoimmune encephalopathy, which describes the immune system eating the brain. And I'm actually witnessing that in some people that I've interacted with, that I know over the years, who are, leftists, and they're losing cognition. So their brains are being eaten. So
from the vaccine, you're saying they took the vaccine and now they're...
Yeah, from the mRNA, the spike protein. So there's a process, called transfection, where the mRNA infects the nucleus of some of your cells. So some of your body's cells then become permanent producers of spike protein. So their bodies are being permanently poisoned with an ever aggregating supply of this bioweapon, and it attacks the nervous system. So those people are walking dead. Sad to say, but there's no other way to describe it. They will die.
One of the interesting things is no one's published any sort of information about this enzyme called, it's used by retroactive viruses to integrate into the DNA. And I'm surprised that no one's talked about whether that can be used to integrate this mRNA into the nucleus itself, and thereby get cells to become permanent spike protein factories.
But some of it happens even just spontaneously anyway. It's rare, but when you consider how many billions of particles of mRNA are in a vaccine, like 50 billion particles, it gives new meaning. Rare times 50 billion can still equal a good chance. You know what I mean? You understand math. Well, most people don't, but the word rare is meaningless when you have a very high numerator, right? Mm-hmm. So anyway, there we go. We got to wrap this up. But I just want to mention your book again, Google Leaks. Website is googleleaksbook.com. Anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah. If you like fresh intel, follow me on twitter.com/perpetualmaniac. I'm on there for now. And if you want to see more of the leaks, you can look at the full published stash at zachvorhies.com. And trust me, you're going to learn a lot. And whatever you think Google did, I promise you it's worse.
That's the best line of the entire interview. I think you're exactly right. And I want to thank you, Zach, for joining us today. And keep in touch with me about the launch of your project. We'd love to have you back on. We'd love to participate. And maybe there are things that we can do technically on Brighteon to help make the feed of the content easier as well. So we'll talk about that, offline. But thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Take care. Survival Nutrition is our new free audiobook that you can download right now from survivalnutrition.com. In this nearly 8-hour audiobook, you will learn life-saving secrets of how to use food, nutrients, plant molecules, trace minerals, and chemical compounds to save your life, even in a total collapse scenario. I'm Mike Adams, the Health Ranger, and I'm the author of Survival Nutrition. I founded and run a multi-million-dollar food science laboratory, and I'm the author of the best-selling science book, Food Forensics. I'm also a prepper, a patriot, and a survivalist. I can teach you how to survive what's coming by growing your own food, medicine, and antibiotics that can help keep you healthy and alive even during the worst of times. At survivalnutrition.com, you'll be able to instantly download the full free audiobook as MP3 files. Keep a copy of all these files on your local hard drive and print out the full guide just in case we lose the power grid. survivalnutrition.com.